What's up, guys? Doug Polk here with the $1 million game coming to a close. We are going to be looking at everything that went down in this week of high stakes action. We're going to look at all of the pots over $1 million. We're going to talk about various players, everyone that played in this game, the full results of all sessions tallied up and combined so we can see who won, who lost, and everything. With that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into some of the biggest hands. Kicking things off with looking at the biggest pots from this stream, we saw 12 pots that were $1 million or more over the 3 days of play, primarily occurring on the first day that had some of the deepest stacks and wildest action, including the top 2 pots from the entire week. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to be counting hands where somebody went all in and the other guy folded. We're going to talk about pots where at showdown 2 people reached it with all bets called. The number 1 largest pot from the show this week, I already reviewed on this channel, so I don't want to go into it all too much. But it was this trips over trips hand between Alan Keating and Texas Mike, where Texas Mike got a very fortunate river card in order to save himself a lot of money. This was the only pot from the week that ended up over $2 million. And frankly, guys, I can't think of 2 players that are better fit for this. These guys battled out on every single session during the $1 million cash game week and played some of the loosest poker of any of the players that played in this game. But that's not where the gigantic pots ended. We actually had one other pot that was just about $2 million, although it was a smidge under. Another very well-known hand that we analyzed on this channel as well, between Peter and Keating and Jack, where there was a 3-way river spot and Keating decided to bluff jam the Queen 10 before Peter ended up making a very impressive hero call.
Credit for thinking this long. There's the call. Unbelievable. Boss. And Keating's gonna need chips.
There were 10 other hands that broke the $1 million mark, with the next biggest being this Airball versus Keating hand, 6-5 suited versus 8-4. We broke that down yesterday if you want a full in-depth analysis, but this impressive hero call from Keating ended up making the list. Actually, somewhat impressively, 7 of the $12 million pots did include Alan Keating. So without him, we might have not had over half of these hands even happen. Fairly easy to imagine the other player that was frequently in these $1 million pots. That would be Texas Mike, who played $5 million pots or more over the course of the 3 days of games. The Keating versus Nik Airball pot was third biggest at 1.6. The Keating Ace-8 suited versus Jack's King Queen was the fourth at 1.5. We analyzed that here on the channel as well. But there were some giant hands we didn't really take a look at. Let's take a look at a couple so we can see what happened. The biggest hand we did not end up covering was a giant pot between Nik Airball and Brandon Steven. Let's go ahead and take a look at this one in closer depth. The hand begins with Stanley Tang opening up with King 6 suited. And the action folding to Nik Airball, looks down at 10-9 of hearts, decides to 3-bet to $30,000. And the action folds around to Brandon Steven, who looks down at King Jack offsuit. This is a bit of a weird hand. Normally you would just be folding King Jack here, but it's possible that Brandon thinks the Airball is going after Stanley in this pot and maybe a little bit wider than he should be pre-flop. Brandon comes in for a very large 4-bet, $107,000 to go here. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to make it a little bit smaller than this, but at the same time, I do like going big if you think your opponents are going to be a little bit loose versus this raise. Although if that's the case, probably wouldn't want to have King Jack. Anyway, the action does fold back to Airball. Kind of awkward here with 10-9 suited in position. We're getting very close to just wanting to fold this pre-flop. In fact, I think I would likely just let this one go. But in this situation, you are in position. And you're also on a TV cash game that you'd probably like to get invited back to. And I think people that fold suited connectors end up on the outs.
No one wants you there. You're on the outs.
Back to the action. Wait, hold on. I'm receiving some news. We have breaking news. Club WPT Gold is entering the 21st century. As on May 7th, multi-tabling is here. Imagine playing up to 4 tables at the same time. Oh, god damn it. I did the code Doug challenge the wrong month. If you like playing more than one table, make sure to sign up using code Doug. I'll see you on Sunday. Anyway, Airball does decide to make the call here in position with the 10-9 suited, and we are off to the flop. It is about as dry as you can really get, guys. We're looking at a 3-deuce-deuce flop here. That is a board that neither player is very likely to connect with, but there are 2 hearts out there, which of course becomes quite relevant because Nik Airball has a flush draw, and Brandon Steven does have the King of Hearts. Brandon now bets 77,000 on the flop. Seems like a totally fine size to go. And this is very awkward now for Nik Airball. In some spots in 3-bet pots or 4-bet pots, you might want to just raise with your draws so that you can knock out some hands and then maybe get all in. But on this board, you kind of can't really raise because what are you representing if you raise in this situation? You're probably not calling this 4-bet with a hand like pocket threes or ace deuce suited. So you're almost just saying that you trap pre-flop, or maybe you have a middling pocket pair that simply thinks Brandon missed the flop. With either of those hands though, or rather when you have those hands, you are not going to want to raise most likely, because if your opponent does have aces, kings, queens, like they were saying pre-flop, you are going to find yourself getting stacked. Nik Airball now in position does decide to just go ahead and call the flop. I like this decision, and we are off to a turn. And the turn is a beautiful one for Brandon as he hits the king on the turn, improving to top pair. Now his hand, of course, tremendously more strong, and Nik Airball has to feel a bit concerned that even in a scenario where Brandon was in fact behind on the flop, or rather was bluffing the flop, he could have improved now to top pair. In this situation for Brandon, I definitely like to continue to bet. You have top pair, you're representing a story pre-flop. If you were bluffing up till now, you're definitely going to bluff here on the turn. So he decides to go ahead and bet the turn, and I like that decision. I wouldn't hate the idea of once in a while going for a check here to try and trap Nik Airball, but I do think in this spot, you typically want to keep barreling and tell your story you have a king or you have a high pair, and let Airball try to call you down if he does have something that's a middling pocket pair. This is where the hand gets pretty crazy though. Generally speaking, in spots like this in position, I would recommend players only just call. Raising here doesn't really represent all that many hands. And sure, maybe if Brandon is bluffing in this spot, going all in gets him off of his bluffs. At the same time, I think I would prefer to just call all of my hands in position and look to play the river. That said, Brandon, it does not have a lot of chips left behind, so there could be some value here in just trying to get him to fold if he has a hand like ace queen or ace five or queen jack, something like that. But I do prefer a call here in position from Nik Airball because jamming does not really represent any hands. Airball has other ideas though and does go all in, which is a very interesting spot. What happens when players go all in situations where they don't represent many hands? In my personal experience, I found those hands tend to be quite strong, but let me know in the chat below. When someone goes all in a weird spot, is it more of a bluff? Is it more of a value bet? Let me know what you think. Although I don't always want to know what you think, like for example, the comment on yesterday's video where you guys had this many comments about my t-shirt. I'm just surprised to see my 97% male audience cares this much about what I'm wearing. Let me live my life, guys. Let me live my life. Oh, and by the way, in case you guys didn't see this, I actually have a $200,000 bet once again versus Bill Perkins to lose half my body fat, this time in 6 months. If you want updates, might throw some on Instagram, not totally sure, but you're probably going to see me get a lot less fat over the course of the next 6 months. Or you're going to see me get a lot less financially stable. Back to the action. This is a weird spot now for Brandon, and you can see it. Like, listen to his table talk as he goes through this situation.
And there's just too much money in the pot, right?
There's 4-bet pre-flop. Maybe Airball could play.
Flop a set of threes. I'm just gonna go crazy. No way.
Aces or kings or ace king this way occasionally.
Call the flop with ace king. Ace king with the ace of hearts, maybe.
4-bet by Brandon pre-flop.
There's too much money in the pot. I can't fucking fold.
Right.
Gosh, 400. I know I'm no good, but I can't fold.
Right.
It's a great situation. 400, 800 a pot. I got 200. It's a great situation for you. I can't fold, but I know I'm no good.
People don't fold much when you give them this good of a price. There's the call.
Twice?
Ultimately, he does make the right decision. If you're going to bet a king on the turn, you have to call the jam. Frankly, if you ever folded this, you would be folding way, way too many hands, and your opponent represents something kind of weird. So it's not a spot you feel great about because the spot's just so weird. But at the same time, I do think it is the correct call. It ended up being the correct call. And Brandon did hold to take down this giant pot. Not going to go into this hand too in depth because I thought it was relatively standard, but we did have another giant hand on day one where Jack had pocket aces and Steve ended up having top pair and a flush draw against him. These two hands both extremely strong in a re-raise pot pre-flop. They went to war, and unfortunately for Steve, Jack's aces held. A lot of these hands we've been through, of course, Texas Mike ace-6 suited versus Keating's kings, the Texas Mike pocket jacks versus Peter's aces, the Texas Mike Jack 6 versus Steve's Queen Jack and Jack's King 10. Basically, Texas Mike had a lot of hands that we have reviewed here on the channel. There was one large pot that we did not end up covering that I thought was pretty interesting between Haralabous and Alan Keating. The lineup had been thinning out for the night and it was down to short-handed when this giant pot took place. Our hand begins at 2K, 4K. The button opens it up with pocket threes here from Alan Keating. And now Haralabous decides to 3-bet with 10 deuce suited. A little bit out of character from Haralabous the way he played most of the session, being the tightest or roughly tightest player over the course of a couple of days. That said, when you're in a lineup with these two guys, it's probably pretty likely you're going to be playing tighter than them. Back over to Alan Keating. He does make the call with pocket threes, and we are taking a flop here. It's not too often that you just destroy the flop with 10 deuce, but that will be the case here on a 10-5 deuce flop, top and bottom pair for Haralabous. These spots are wonderful when you 3-bet representing a high pair, and you actually hit 2 pair, because then if your opponent does get out of line, you have a giant hand they're not going to expect. Now, on the flop, 130K out there, Haralabous does decide to bet 55,000, a half pot bet here on the flop. Don't mind this size or perhaps a little bit smaller, but either way seems totally reasonable. Over to Alan Keating now, pocket threes. I do think you got to float one here. You don't love your life with threes, but you are still ahead of hands like ace king, king queen, ace 4 suited, stuff like that. So floating one does make some sense. After Keating makes the call, we see an action turn card. The 4 of spades rolls off. Now Alan Keating does have an open ender to go along with his pair of threes. With about 500K behind, the question for both players, how do they want to play this? In Haralabous' shoes, I really do like to bet the turn, build this pot, get some value. It's unlikely there are too many hands that have you beat, and there are also plenty of hands that are going to want to call that you can get value from. That is Haralabous' game plan as he does fire the turn, betting about 2/3, 60% pot, setting up for a reasonable sized river jam. At this point, Alan Keating decides it's time to move all in, going all in with his pocket threes. And I think this is actually a pretty sensible play. He blocks ace 3, he blocks 6-3. If he gets called, he has outs. And there are definitely a bunch of hands he would want to jam the turn for value. Let's say, for example, he had a hand like pocket fours, which is quite believable. You might want to jam and stack your opponent right there, as well as a few hands like perhaps ace 3 suited or 5-4 suited. You are going to want to sometimes jam this turn and stack Haralabous when he has high pairs and not allow for bad rivers to come out that he might be able to get away from. So I actually like this hand from both players. Haralabous now making the call. Seems like a pretty well played hand, other than maybe a bit too loose pre-flop here from Haralabous. And the players are all in, off to the races, running it twice. Got to agree with Keating on this one. There are not a lot of 2 pairs out there. Certainly have to be surprised when your opponent shows 10 deuce suited and they made it $60-something thousand to go pre-flop. Just a little 2x annual average American salary here with the suited Doyle Brunson. I guess technically it's more like 1.5x average median salary in the US, but who's counting? Some of the other big hands we saw as well. The Keating ace king versus Jack's 10s was over $1 million. And finally, Texas Mike's ace queen versus Jasper's 8-7 suited. The final pot over $1 million. What I liked about that hand is it was by far the fastest. These guys just each put 500K in the middle, and the money went Texas Mike's way. All right, so zooming out, how did all of these players do? We had 13 players play over 3 days of action, the $1 million game, and we had some big winners and some big losers. It's always nice when you're a big winner, which is why you should head on down to Club WPT Gold and use code Doug today. I'm giving away 10,000 Soups coins to anyone who purchases coins this week on the site if you use code Doug, or for people that are illiterate, code Doug. So head on down today. I'm going to be drawing the winners Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Time. But back to the results over the week of games. We have this list of players that I put together based on the results from High Roll Poker. And I can see here that the largest winner from the week ended up being Alan Keating. It makes sense. He was on the right side of a lot of these large pots, chopping the biggest pot. I guess losing the Queen 10 versus Jack, so certainly a big one not going his way. But winning the 8-4 versus Airball 6-5, winning the Ace 8 versus Jack's King Queen, winning the Kings versus Texas Mike's Ace 6. A lot of these giant pots all went Keating's way, and you can see those adding up with 3 straight days of wins, plus 450K on day 1, about plus 600K on day 2, and plus 850 on day 3, for a grand total of plus $1.9 million. There were no other winners up over $1 million, but we did have some other players posting big wins. Haralabous with plus 850 over 2 days of play, although that pretty much entirely came from his first session on day 2. Brandon Steven with a win of plus $705,000 in just 1 session of play on day 3. Stanley with a plus $600,000 session on day 3 as well. And that rounds out all of the players I would qualify as big winners. We saw some smaller wins as well from a few players like Britney, who won $360,000 on day 2, and to my knowledge won the largest cash game pot a female player has ever played. We didn't end up breaking this hand down as it didn't break that $1 million pot barrier, but I do feel like if it is possibly the largest pot a female player has won on a cash game show, it's probably worth at least taking a look at. We saw in a re-raised pre-flop pot here between Airball and Britney, the flop come out with an action flop, Britney flopping a flush, and Airball flopping top set. After Airball bets the flop, Britney puts in the raise. Very difficult spot here for Airball. I probably would prefer a call, but I could also see the logic in wanting to re-raise all in on the flop, just in case Britney is raising with a diamond and you don't want to let her have cards come off for free that can improve to beat your set. Also, if she does call, you're going to have a ton of outs, which ended up being the case for Nik Airball because he had top set up against a flush. He just needed the board to pair in order to win. One more great point about raising the flop: if your opponent did flop a set, perhaps, you're going to make sure to get every dollar, so I can see where Nik Airball is coming from on this flop jam. Unfortunately for Nik Airball, he's up against a flush, and he does not get there as the pot gets shipped Britney's way. Controversial player Eric Lindgren did play day 1, won $300,000. All in all, a successful trip out to Los Angeles for Eric Lindgren, turning his $25,000 into a $1 million buy-in, and then turning that $1 million into a $1.3 million stack, with a total net winnings of something like $1.3 million. Certainly a good time in Los Angeles. The list of winners is rounded out with Jasper, who won $145,000. Had some giant swings. It was a bit of a comeback for Jasper, so good to see him post a win. And that ends our list of winning players. We had 8 winning players and only 5 losing players, which usually means those guys got buried, and that is certainly the case. While we only had 1 player win over $1 million, we actually had 3 players lose over $1 million and 1 player lose almost $1 million, with Airball coming in with a minus $482,000 result. He had a disastrous session on day 3. In fact, at one point while I was watching, it looked like the wheels were coming off the wagon. But he did post some good wins, plus 400 day 1, plus 400 day 2. So all in all, down about $500,000. The large losers in this game over the course of the week: Steve, playing only Monday and losing $930,000. A poor session for Steve. Ran pretty bad, and the all-ins did not go his way. Pav, Texas Mike, and Jack all lost over $1 million. Pav and Jack playing only day 1, losing $1 and $1.5 million respectively, with Jack posting the largest loss of any player in the game. If you like seeing videos like this, subscribe to the channel, make sure to turn on notifications, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for my stream at 11 a.m. Central Time.